They were young, attractive, and female, yet capable of unimaginable cruelty. In the aftermath of World War II, the world recoiled in disbelief as the brutal actions of women like Irma Grese, Maria Mandl, and Johanna Bormann came to light. These were not ordinary women swept up by war. They were SS guards at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi extermination camp, and they played active roles in torture, murder, and mass extermination. The idea that women, traditionally seen as nurturers, could become architects of death was so jarring it shook the very core of societal beliefs. This is not a story for the weak. It's a confrontation with the darkest aspects of human nature, a reminder that evil wears many faces, and that justice, when it comes, is often too late, too limited, and deeply complex. We will uncover the roles these women played, the horrors they unleashed, the trials that followed, and the executions that shocked a war-weary world. This is the brutal, necessary account of how some of the most notorious female SS guards of Auschwitz-Birkenau finally faced justice. Auschwitz-Birkenau was not just another Nazi concentration camp. It was the epicenter of the Holocaust. Located in occupied Poland, it functioned as both a labor camp and a death factory. Between 1940 and 1945, over 1.1 million people were murdered there, the vast majority of them Jews, but also Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, political dissidents, and others the Nazis considered subhuman. Victims were transported in cattle cars, stripped of their belongings and identity, and within hours, often minutes, many were dead in the gas chambers. As the SS expanded the camp system and deportations increased, they faced a pressing problem, a shortage of personnel. To meet this demand, they began recruiting women to serve as guards, primarily in the women's sections of the camp. These female guards, known as SS Aufseherinnen, were not simply secretaries or bystanders. They received training at nearby camps like Ravensbrück and were quickly integrated into the Nazi machinery of oppression and death. Most of these women were young, many in their early 20s, and came from working or lower middle-class backgrounds. Some were motivated by ideology, others by opportunity, status, or steady pay during wartime. But once inside the system, they often embraced their roles with shocking enthusiasm. Tasks included supervising forced labor, administering savage beatings, assisting with roll calls, and even selecting prisoners for execution. They wore neatly pressed uniforms and carried whips or dogs. Prisoners feared them just as much as male SS men, sometimes more. What made their cruelty especially haunting was the contrast between their outward appearance and the monstrous acts they committed. In a world of death and terror, these women became instruments of genocide and, eventually, symbols of a justice that would come too late for millions. Among the many female guards at Auschwitz-Birkenau, few names provoke as much horror as Irma Grese. Known by prisoners as the hyena of Auschwitz, Grese was just 22 years old when she was arrested after the war. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and strikingly young, she was the epitome of the Nazi ideal. But behind the appearance was a brutal, sadistic killer. Survivors testified that she beat women with a whip, set dogs on them for sport, and took perverse pleasure in selecting victims for the gas chambers. She quickly rose through the ranks to become senior overseer and was feared across multiple camps, including Ravensbrück and Bergen-Belsen. Irma Grese wasn't alone. Maria Mandl, another infamous figure, held the title of Lagerführerin, or chief of the women's camp. She was directly responsible for over 500,000 women prisoners. Mandl oversaw daily selections, ordered beatings, and personally helped expand the women's section of Auschwitz-Birkenau. One of her most chilling contributions was the formation of the Women's Orchestra, which played music as prisoners marched to their deaths. a cruel twist of psychological torture. Then there was Johanna Bormann, nicknamed the Woman with the Dogs. She patrolled the camp with her trained Alsatians and used them to maul prisoners, sometimes to death. Her acts of violence were so severe that even male SS guards reportedly found her behavior disturbing. Elisabeth Falkenrath was another senior female overseer implicated in countless atrocities. She was present during selections for the gas chambers and earned a reputation for cold efficiency in executing Nazi orders. These women were not anomalies. They were part of a system that rewarded cruelty and dehumanization. Some embraced it eagerly, others adapted, but all were responsible. Their trials after the war revealed shocking levels of enthusiasm for violence, and the public's response to their crimes and their executions reflected a deep revulsion at the idea that such brutality could come from those society once thought incapable of it. As the war came to an end and Allied forces liberated the camps, the full scale of Nazi crimes shocked the world. The hunt for justice began quickly, and many of the most notorious female guards were captured and brought to trial. Two key proceedings would become the primary arenas for accountability: the Belsen trial in 1945 and the Auschwitz trial in Krakow, Poland in 1947. The Belsen trial was held by the British military shortly after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, where many Auschwitz personnel had been transferred near the war's end. Irma Grese, Johanna Bormann, and Elisabeth Falkenrath were among the female guards tried there. The courtroom heard devastating testimony from survivors, descriptions of beatings, torture, and selections for the gas chambers. Grese, defiant until the end, was sentenced to death by hanging. She was executed on December 13, 1945, alongside Bormann and Falkenrath. The executioner later noted how calmly Grace walked to the gallows, an eerie final act from one of the most reviled figures of the Nazi regime. In Poland, the Auschwitz trial saw the prosecution of 40 former staff members, including high-ranking guards like Maria Mandl. The Polish tribunal, facing overwhelming evidence, handed down numerous death sentences. Mandl was hanged in January 1948 after being found guilty of direct participation in the mass murder of prisoners, including her role in selections and camp expansion. Yet not all were punished so swiftly. Many female guards initially escaped detection or were released after short sentences. Some reintegrated into society, changed their names, or fled abroad. Others, like Hermine Braunsteiner, were tracked down decades later. In her case, deported from the United States in the 1970s and tried in West Germany, justice was uneven. Some faced the gallows. Others lived quiet lives for years. But the trials, with their testimonies, photographs, and legal records, ensured that the crimes would not be forgotten. The world had seen what these women did, and for a few at least, justice was served with the weight of history behind it. The revelation that women, often young, seemingly ordinary, had committed atrocities at Auschwitz sparked a unique kind of public horror. Society was not prepared to accept that those typically associated with care and compassion could become agents of death. Newspapers described Irma Grese as the beautiful beast, mixing shock with morbid fascination. Photographs of her in court, calm and composed, became iconic and chilling. Gender shaped the perception of guilt. While male SS officers were expected to follow violent orders, female guards were seen as having more agency in choosing cruelty. This paradox led to both harsher and more lenient judgments. Some women were executed swiftly, their youth making their crimes seem even more monstrous. Others received lighter sentences or were quietly released, perhaps because society struggled to reconcile their actions with their appearance. Survivors, however, made no such distinction. Testimonies were clear. These women were brutal, sadistic, and fully complicit. Female guards were feared, not in spite of their femininity, but often because of the psychological shock it created. Their betrayals felt deeper. Historians have debated their motivations: ideological belief, power, sadism, or simple ambition. Some scholars argue that the system dehumanized guards as well as prisoners, creating a hierarchy of violence that rewarded the most ruthless. But nothing excuses the choices made. The female SS guards of Auschwitz-Birkenau didn't just follow orders. They enforced terror with initiative. Their crimes still challenge our assumptions about gender, power, and the human capacity for evil. Today, the legacy of the female SS guards at Auschwitz-Birkenau lives on in museums, trial records, and survivor testimony. At the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, visitors walk the same grounds where Irma Grese and Maria Mandl once exercised power over life and death. Their stories are not glorified, they are exposed as cautionary tales of how ordinary individuals, regardless of gender, can become instruments of evil. Education programs, documentaries, and historical research continue to confront these disturbing truths, not to sensationalize, but to warn. Because the Holocaust wasn't committed by monsters in hiding. It was carried out by people who looked like neighbors, teachers, even daughters. Justice, in many cases, was partial or delayed, but remembrance is permanent. As survivors pass on, their voices remain in archives, testimonies, and court transcripts. The question now is not just what they did, but how do we ensure it never happens again?